"Look at him," the comedian said, and the spotlight swung off her and onto us. "A man with no story, nothing behind the stare. They wind him up in the morning and stand him in a corner so the rich people feel guarded." The ballroom laughed. 800 people in evening dress, glasses catching the chandelier light, and they laughed because she was famous and because that is what you do at a charity gala when a famous person points and grins. I stood 3 paces to the left of the man she was pointing at in the same red tunic, the same bearskin, the same white gloves, and I felt the laugh land on my own skin like a thrown drink. But I was not the one she meant. She meant Sergeant Cray. "I should tell you my name. I am Lance Corporal Dunmore, of the Sentinel Company of the House of Aldermarsh, and I had served beside Sergeant Eldon Cray for 2 years and learned in that time exactly 2 things about him: that he was the steadiest man I had ever stood a watch with, and that he never, under any provocation, told you anything about himself. The men called him the Quiet One. The officers called him Reliable. The newer lads, who did not know better, called him a statue and meant it as a small unkindness, the way young men do. None of us knew where he had come from. None of us knew what the 2 faded ribbons on his chest were for. He wore them and said nothing, and after a while you stopped asking, because asking Cray a question about Cray was like asking the gate a question about the gate. So when the Aldermarsh Children's Trust asked the Sentinel Company to send 2 guardsmen to stand the ceremonial post at its annual fundraising gala, a glittering thing, a stage, a long evening of speeches and a celebrity roast to loosen the wallets of the wealthy, and the duty sergeant put Cray and me on the list, I thought of it as the easiest night of the season. Stand still. Look the part. Let the photographers have their pictures of the famous folk shaking hands beside the famous uniform. Be home by midnight. I did not understand then what a roast was. I understand it now. We took our post at the foot of the stage at 7, on a low dais beneath the great chandelier, flanking a banner that read the ALDERMARSH Children's Trust in gold. We were decoration. We knew we were decoration. A guardsman learns early that half his duty is to be a thing people look at and feel something about: order, history, safety, and that the trick of it is to give them nothing of yourself while you do it. So we gave them nothing. We stood. The room filled. The wine went round. And then the lights dimmed and the host came up and the comedians took the stage one after another, and I learned what a roast was. It is a kind of public unkindness sold as fun. A famous person stands at a microphone and says cruel, clever things about other famous people in the room, and the room laughs and money is raised, and afterward everyone agrees it was all in good spirit. The targets that night were a singer, a footballer, a man who had grown rich selling a phone application, and a politician's wife. They were rich and they could take it, and they laughed loudest of all at themselves, because that too is the game. Then the 3rd comedian, a tall woman with a sharp, bright manner, very popular, the kind of face that sells out a hall in an hour, looked down off the front of the stage, straight at us, and decided that the 2 unmoving men in the red coats were funnier than any of the rich people she'd been hired to mock. "Oh, now," she said, delighted, and the spotlight came down on us like a falling thing. "Now this, look at them, look at this one." She meant Cray. She had picked him without knowing why. The eye goes to the stillest thing in a room the way it goes to a candle. A man with no story, nothing behind the stare. They wind him up in the morning and stand him in a corner so the rich people feel guarded. The room laughed. I felt Cray beside me, and I want to be exact about this because it matters to what came after. He did not change, not a degree. The chin-strap line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the eyes fixed at the middle distance over the heads of the crowd, none of it moved. I had seen men hold still under a hard sergeant's inspection. I had never seen a man hold this still under 800 people laughing at him. It was not the stillness of a man enduring. It was the stillness of a man who simply was not there to be reached. That, of course, only made it better sport. "I'm serious," the comedian went on, walking the front edge of the stage now, microphone close to her mouth. I've met soldiers. Soldiers have stories. They want to tell you the stories, buy them a drink, and you can't make them stop. A ripple of warm laughter she had the room. But this is the off-the-shelf model. No drink's going to start this one talking. There's nothing in there. He's a coat with a hat on it. He's the thing they put up, so the actual brave people can stand somewhere warm. I will tell you that my own hand tightened on my rifle, and that I had to remind myself, deliberately, of the first thing they teach you on the line, that you are not your temper, that the uniform is a promise you make to stand for something larger than the insult of the hour. I made the promise again, in my head, and I held. Cray did not need to remind himself of anything. He had gone somewhere the comedian could not follow, and he watched the middle distance, and he waited for it to be over the way you wait for weather. "Say something," she said to him, leaning down, grinning, sure of her ground. "Go on, one word. Prove there's a man in there." She held the microphone out over the lip of the stage, toward his face, and turned to the room, and the room leaned in, hungry now, because there is a cruelty in a crowd that wakes up when it smells a man who will not defend himself. "Nothing," she announced when nothing came. "See, nothing behind the stare, a man with no story." She straightened, pleased, and went back to the rich and the safe, and the spotlight swung away, and the gala rolled on. And it should have ended there. It would have ended there, a small unkindness, swallowed, forgotten by morning, the kind of thing a guardsman eats 100 times a year, except for what happened at the end of the night, which I did not see coming, and which I have not stopped thinking about since. Because the woman in the third row had seen Cray's face when the comedian said the word story. I had not seen it. I was looking straight ahead, holding my own promise with both hands. But the woman in the third row, an older woman, silver-haired, in a plain dark dress among all that glitter, a guest of the trust and not a celebrity at all, had been watching Cray's eyes the whole time, the way some people watch the quiet man at a loud party because they suspect he is the only one worth watching. And she had seen something cross them. Not hurt, not anger. Something older and heavier than either, there and gone in a quarter-second. When the comedian said the man with no story. She would tell me all of this later. At the time I knew none of it. At the time I only knew that the speeches resumed, and the auction began, and the great slow business of separating wealthy people from their money got underway, and Cray and I stood our post and were, once again, decoration. The auction is where the night turned. The Aldermarsh Children's Trust ran a hospital, a long, low, kind place at the edge of the city where sick children went, the ones whose families could not pay, and the ones whose illnesses had no easy name, and the gala existed to keep its doors open another year. So the auction was not only paintings and holidays and a week on someone's boat. Halfway through, the host quieted the room and brought up a single lot with no glamour to it at all. The naming of the hospital's new children's ward, which the trust had built that year and could not yet afford to open. "A ward," the host said, "with 40 beds, 40 children at a time who, right now, are waiting. We are asking tonight for the gift that opens those doors. And we are asking as well," he glanced at his card, "for the name. The family or the person whose gift opens this ward will have their name above its door for as long as it stands." The bidding started high and climbed. The phone application man and the footballer went at it for sport as much as charity, the numbers leaping, the room applauding each jump. And it was somewhere in that climb. The figures absurd now. A children's ward turned into a contest of vanity between two rich men who would forget it by the weekend, that Sergeant Cray broke his post. I felt it before I saw it. 2 years beside a man teaches your body to read his. I felt the half-degree shift of his weight, and my stomach dropped, because a guardsman does not move on a ceremonial post, does not, the way the gate does not walk away from the wall. Cray took one step down off the dais. He did not stride into the room. He did not raise his voice. I am not sure in 2 years I had ever heard him raise his voice. He simply stepped down, removed his bearskin, which a guardsman does not do, which is nearly a sacred undoing, and held it in the crook of his arm, and stood there at the front of the room, a bare-headed man in a red coat, until the host trailed off and the bidding stopped, and 800 people turned to look at the statue that had decided, after all, to be a man. The comedian, off to the side of the stage with a glass of wine, smiled like Christmas. "Oh," she said into a live microphone, "it speaks." Cray looked at her. Then he looked away from her, dismissing her as gently and completely as a man brushes a moth off a sleeve, and he looked instead at the host, and then at the room, and when he spoke his voice was low and even and carried to the back wall without effort, the voice of a man used to being heard once. "I have a story," he said. "I'll trade it for the ward." The room did not understand him. I did not understand him. A guardsman has no money. We are paid in shillings and pride. What could he be trading? The host, who was a decent man and quick on his feet, leaned to the microphone and said carefully, "I'm not sure I follow, Sergeant." "You've a gift on the table for the family that opens the doors," Cray said, "and a name to go above them. I can't outbid these gentlemen. But I'll tell this room one true story it has never heard, and when I'm done, if it's worth anything to you, you'll put a different name above that ward than the one that's winning the bidding now. Not mine. I'll get to the name." He turned the bearskin slowly in his hands. "It'll take 4 minutes. I've never told it. I won't tell it again." There is a kind of quiet that is the absence of noise, and there is another kind that is a room holding its breath, and the second kind came down over that ballroom now. Even the comedian had stopped smiling, though she did not yet know why. The host looked at the chairman of the trust, an old man at the head table, who gave the smallest nod, and the host stepped back from the microphone and gestured to the bare-headed guardsman. "The floor is yours." "My story doesn't start with me," Cray said. "It starts with a boy named Theo, 11 years old. This was a long way from here and a long time ago, 18 years, near enough, in a country I'd been sent to that I won't name, because the naming of it does nobody any good now. I wasn't in this coat then. I wore a different uniform and I did a different kind of work, and I'll say only that the work was hard and that I was, for a while, very good at it. I felt the lance corporal beside me go still, and then realized I was the lance corporal and the stillness was my own. The two faded ribbons, a different uniform, a different kind of work. I had stood beside this man for 2 years, and a great cold door was opening in my understanding of him. "There was a village," Cray went on, "in a valley that everyone with sense was leaving because a bad thing was coming up the valley behind them. Soldiers, not the kind with manners. My unit's job was the bridge at the head of the valley. Hold the bridge, keep it open, so the people coming up the road behind the fleeing crowd could cross it and get to the high ground on the far side. Simple soldiering. Stand somewhere and don't leave it." He almost smiled, and there was nothing happy in it. "I've made a life of standing somewhere and not leaving it. I was younger then. I thought I understood the cost." He paused, and in the pause you could have heard a glass set down anywhere in that hall. The boy, Theo, came across the bridge near the end of it with the last of the crowd, and he was alone. No mother, no father, separated in the crush behind, or worse, I never learned which. He was 11, and he was carrying his little sister, who was 4, on his back, the way you'd carry a pack, her arms around his neck, and he had carried her, I found out later, the better part of a day. He got her across the bridge to where we were, and then he turned around to go back. "He'd left someone," Cray said. "An old woman, a neighbor, a grandmother, not even his own blood, who'd fallen in the road behind, half a mile back and couldn't walk, and the crowd had gone around her the way crowds do. Theo had carried his sister across to safety, and then he meant to walk back down that road into what was coming, to get the old woman because nobody else would, and he was 11, and it did not occur to him that he could simply not." The comedian had set down her wine. I saw it. I do not think she knew she had done it. "I stopped him," Cray said. "I caught him by the collar at the foot of the bridge, and I told him no. I told him it was not his job. I told him the brave thing and the sensible thing were the same thing here, and both of them were to take his sister to the high ground and live. And this 11-year-old boy looked up at me. I was a hard man then. I had a hard man's face, Men twice his size did what I told them, and he said, "It's somebody's job. You're a soldier. Whose job is it if it's not yours?" Cray let that sit in the room. "Whose job is it," he said again quietly, "if it's not yours?" 11 years old, half-starved, his little sister on his back, and he had found the one question I did not have an answer to. So I gave him my answer. I told him to put his sister down right there where my sergeant could see her, and to wait and not to move, and I went back down the road myself and I got the old woman. He turned the bearskin once more in his hands. It was not heroics. I want this room to understand that there was nothing fine about it. It was a man who'd been beaten by a child's logic doing a foolish, dangerous thing, because a boy had shamed him into remembering what the uniform was for. I carried the old woman back up the road. I was not quick about it. The bad thing came up the valley faster than we'd been told it would, and the last stretch of that road was the longest walk of my life, and I will not describe it to you, because there are children in this hospital you are raising money for, and I will not put pictures in this room that don't belong here. I'll only tell you that I got her across. The old woman lived. She died 8 years later in a bed of age, which is how a person ought to die. Someone near the front of the room was crying quietly. The host stood very still by the curtain. And the comedian, I kept watching the comedian, I could not help it, had her hand over her mouth. "And the boy," Cray said, "Theo, he'd waited like I told him. He'd put his sister down where my sergeant could see her, and he had not moved an inch, this child, in the middle of everything, because a soldier had told him to wait, and he had decided that a soldier keeping his word was a thing he could lean on. We got them both out, both of them, to the high ground and then off it, and then a long way after that, through channels I won't bore you with, to a country that would have them. I lost track of them the way you do. I went home. I left that uniform behind, and after some years I put on this one, because I'd had my fill of the hard kind of standing, still, and I wanted the kind where the worst thing that happens is a famous woman tells a room you've got nothing behind your eyes." He said it without heat, almost gently, and the comedian flinched as though she had been touched. "I thought that was the end of the story," Cray said. "A man does a hard thing once when he's young and carries it and never speaks of it because speaking of it feels like asking for something, and the whole point was that nobody asked you to do it. That's the story I never told. That's the one you said wasn't there." He looked, for the first time in a long while, directly at the woman with the microphone. "You were close. There is nothing behind the stare. There's just this. I emptied it out a long time ago and put it somewhere I wouldn't have to look at it. You don't carry an old woman up a road like that and come back with anything left over for staring." And then Sergeant Cray did the thing that turned the whole night over, and I will tell you, I had no warning of it, none. He looked toward the third row, to the silver-haired woman in the plain dark dress, the one I had not noticed, the one who had been watching his eyes all night. "But it wasn't the end of the story," Cray said. "Because 3 weeks ago I got a letter." He drew it from inside his tunic, a folded sheet, soft along the creases from being read and reread, and I understood with a small shock that he had carried it onto a ceremonial post, against every regulation, because he had not been able to put it down. "It found its way to the barracks through 3 forwardings and a great deal of patience," Cray said. "It was from a doctor. A young woman, a pediatrician, a children's doctor, at a hospital in another city. And the letter said, 'I have been looking for you for 2 years. I think you are the soldier who carried the old woman up the road at the bridge in the valley, the day my brother carried me across on his back. I was 4. My name is Sira. The boy was Theo. We lived.'" You could feel the room turn its head, slowly, all of it at once, the way a field of grass turns under wind. Because everyone had heard the boy and the 4-year-old sister on his back, and now here was a letter, and the arithmetic of 18 years was being done in 800 heads at the same moment. "She wrote that her brother kept us alive after," Cray said. "Across the border, and the years that came after which were not kind ones for 2 children with no family. Theo worked and went without, and saw to it that his little sister had what she needed and that she went to school, all the way through, because he had decided when he was 11 years old that he was the one whose job it was. She became a doctor, a children's doctor. She wrote, and I'll read you her words because they are better than mine, she wrote. I have spent my whole life trying to be worth the road you carried that woman up. I became a doctor for children because somebody once decided a stranger's child was his job, and I have never stopped being that child. I needed to thank you while we both could. Cray's voice did not break. It is important that I tell you this because every other voice in that room was breaking. His did not. He had emptied himself out a long time ago, and what was left was steady. And the brother? The host asked, very softly, forgetting he held the room's only microphone, asking it the way you'd ask at a graveside. Theo. Theo died 4 years ago, Cray said. Working. He never did stop being the one whose job it was. He worked too hard, too long for too little, holding the two of them up, and his heart gave out at 31, which is no age at all. His sister was at his side. She told me in the letter that the last clear thing he said to her was about the bridge. He told her to remember that a man had gone back down a road for a stranger once when nobody was making him, and that this meant the world had that in it, and so she should never decide it didn't. Then he was gone, and she finished her training, and she became the doctor he'd kept alive to become, and she came looking for the soldier from the bridge, to say the thing her brother never got to say. He looked again at the silver-haired woman in the third row. And the silver-haired woman in the third row stood up. She was not Sira. I will say that plainly because I thought for one wild second that she was. She was too old. But she stood, and she was weeping openly, with no shame in it, and when she spoke her voice was steady the way Cray's was steady, two people who had done their crying long ago. I'm the doctor's senior, she said to the room, but really to Cray. I'm the chief of pediatric medicine at the hospital where Dr. Sira Val has worked for the last 6 years. She is the finest young physician I have trained in 40 years, and she is, tonight, on a ward with a child who needs her more than this child needed a party. She could not come. She asked me to come in her place because she had learned, we don't know how, we have our ways, that the soldier from the bridge would be standing his post at this gala tonight, in this city, in that coat. The old woman pressed her hand flat to her chest. She asked me to find him and to say thank you, from her, and from a brother who could not. I had been trying to work out how to walk up to a guardsman who is not allowed to speak, and say a thing like that to him without making a spectacle. And then you stepped down off that platform on your own, Sergeant, so. She lifted her chin. Thank you, from Sira, from Theo, from every child Dr. Val has carried up her own road since. I have stood at state funerals. I have stood the night watch beside a great man lying in state and heard a whole nation go quiet. I had never heard a silence like the one in that ballroom. It was not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of 800 people who had been handed something too heavy to hold and were each, privately, trying to hold it anyway. And then the comedian put down her glass and walked out to the center of the stage, into the light, and did a thing I have never seen a performer do. She turned off her own microphone. She reached up, unclipped the battery pack, switched it dark, and held it down at her side, so that whatever she said next would reach only as far as her own voice could carry it, and could not be recorded or clipped or sold. And then she walked to the front edge of the stage and went down, not gracefully in that gown, but she went down onto one knee, so that she was below him, the bare-headed man in the red coat, looking up. I make my living, she said, and her clear, bright stage voice was gone. This was just a woman's voice, unsteady. I make my living finding the thing a person can't defend and naming it in front of a crowd. I'm good at it. I am very good at it. I looked at you and I saw a man who wouldn't fight back, and I thought, easy. I thought, there's nothing in there worth protecting, so I can take it for free. She drew a breath. I have never in my life been more wrong about a man, and I have never in my life been more glad to be wrong. And I am so ashamed, and I am so grateful, and I don't know how to be both of those in front of all these people, so I'm just going to be both of them, and they can watch." She looked up at him. "You said you'd trade the story for the ward," she said. "I heard you. I want the name above that ward to be Theo Vall, the boy who decided it was his job." She turned her head to the room. "And I want to open the bidding on the gift that does it. I'll match whatever the gentlemen were at, and I'll add to it the fee they're paying me to be funny tonight, every penny, because I have not been funny tonight. I have been a fool, and a fool should pay for the privilege." Her voice cracked and she let it. 40 beds, 40 children at a time, the Theo Vall ward, who's with me? The room came apart and then came together. I do not have a better way to say it. For a moment the gala stopped being a gala, stopped being the careful machine of speeches and applause and tasteful sums, and became 800 people who had each just been handed back something they had let themselves forget they had. The phone application man was on his feet with his hand up before the comedian had finished speaking, and he was not smiling his contest smile now. He called out a figure that doubled what he'd been bidding for sport, and then said, loudly, roughly, like a man surprised by his own throat, "And the name's right. Theo Vall. Don't you dare put mine anywhere near it." The footballer stood and matched him and added to it. The politician's wife, who had been roasted earlier and had laughed gamely along, stood and pledged in a voice gone thick. The chairman of the trust at the head table had his hand pressed over his eyes. It was not a contest of vanity anymore. That was the thing I will remember. 20 minutes earlier, these same people had been bidding to put their own names over a door for the pleasure of seeing them there, and now they were bidding to keep their names off it, falling over one another to give and to be anonymous, because a quiet man had stood in the middle of the room and reminded them what the money was actually for. The host, weeping and trying not to and failing and not caring, ran the auction the way a man runs towards something. The figure climbed and stopped being a figure and started being a fact. The ward would open. Not next year, not when the trust could afford it. Now. 40 children at a time, for as long as the building stood, under the name of a boy who had carried his sister across a bridge and then turned around to go back for a stranger. Through all of it, Sergeant Cray stood at the front of the room, bareheaded, the soft creased letter in one hand and the bearskin in the crook of the other arm, and he watched it happen with that same still face. But I was 3 paces away, and I have stood beside him for 2 years, and I will tell you what the comedian could not see and the room could not see. His eyes were wet, not spilling. A guardsman does not spill. But wet, and fixed now not on the middle distance, but on the silver-haired doctor in the 3rd row, who was the nearest thing in the room to the 4-year-old he had last seen on a boy's back at the foot of a bridge 18 years and a whole life ago. When the bidding finally crested and the host's hammer came down and the room rose to its feet in an ovation that shook the chandelier on its chain, Cray did not bask in it. He waited for the first swell of it to break, and then he lifted one white glove not high, just enough, and the room, astonishingly, quieted for him, because by then it would have done anything he asked. "One more thing," he said, "and then I'll put my hat back on and be a coat in the corner again, which is all I ever wanted to be." A ripple of something that was half a laugh and half a sob went around the hall. Dr. Vall wrote in her letter that she was sorry to have found me by way of a thank you instead of a kindness. She thought she was asking me for something to take her gratitude, which she said felt like a weight she had no right to hand a stranger. He folded the letter slowly along its soft creases and put it back inside his tunic over his heart where he had been carrying it. "So I want it on the record in front of all of you, since you're the witnesses I happen to have. She didn't hand me a weight. She handed me the only thing I ever wanted from that road and never thought I'd get." He looked at the doctor in the 3rd row. "I always wondered if it was worth it," Cray said simply. "You go back down a road like that when you're young and you do a hard thing, and then you spend your whole life not knowing whether it mattered, whether the world you bought a few people with your own hands ever amounted to anything, or whether you should have done the sensible thing after all. You don't get to know. That's the deal. You do the thing and you give up the right to know whether it was worth it. He drew one slow breath. And then a letter finds you in a barracks 18 years later and tells you that the 4-year-old on the boy's back grew up to spend her life carrying other people's children up their own roads. And you find out all at once at the back end of your life that yes, it was worth it. It was worth all of it. His voice stayed level, and that was somehow the thing that finished the room. A man does not get to hear that. I got to hear it. So whatever I traded tonight, I came out ahead, and I want that on the record too. And then Sergeant Eldon Cray put his bearskin back on his head, settled the chin strap, took his one step back up onto the dais, came to attention beside me, and became once again the stillest thing in the room. The quiet one, a coat with a hat on it, a man with no story. Except that now 800 people knew better. The gala ended differently than it began. The remaining comedians, when their turns came, did not roast anyone. One came out and told a true story instead, about his own grandmother, clumsy and unpolished and far better than the cruelty would have been, and the room loved him for it. The evening had been rebuilt around a different center, and the new center was the thing the comedian had stumbled into when she switched off her own microphone. That the most useful thing a person with a crowd's attention can do is point it at something that matters and then get out of the way. When the last speeches were done and the great room began to break up into knots of people pulling on coats and finding their cars, the silver-haired doctor crossed the floor to our dais. The crowd parted for her the way crowds do when they sense a thing is about to happen that they have no part in. She stopped in front of Sergeant Cray and looked up at him. He was a tall man and she was not, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, which was correct, because there was nothing in any language that would have improved that moment. Then she reached into her own bag and brought out a second letter, sealed, and held it up to him. "Sierra wrote you another," she said. "She wrote it before tonight in case you came, in case I found you. She told me to give it to you only if you proved to be the kind of man worth giving it to." The old doctor's mouth moved into something that was almost a smile, the first I'd seen from her. "I am to tell you that you have, comprehensively, passed the test. She also told me to tell you that she is on shift until 6 in the morning, and that the hospital is 40 minutes from here, and that there is a chair by the nurse's station with your name on it whenever you would like to come and meet, at long last, the 4-year-old you put down at the foot of a bridge and told to wait." Cray took the letter. His white glove closed around it very carefully, the way a man holds a thing he is afraid of dropping. He did not open it there. Some things you do not open in a ballroom. "She waited," he said. "It was not quite a question." "Sergeant," the old doctor said, "she has been waiting 18 years. She is very good at it. Her brother taught her how." And she pressed her hand once to his arm over the red wool and turned and went and was gone into the thinning crowd. I should tell you what happened to the comedian because the niche of the thing, the way the world usually runs, would have her humbled and punished, and that would be the satisfying end of it. That is not what happened. What happened was smaller and I think better. She did not slink away. She waited off to the side until the crowd had mostly gone, and then she came to the foot of our dais, and she had her shoes in her hand because the heels had finally beaten her, and she looked up at Cray with her stage face entirely gone. "I'm not going to apologize again," she said. "I did it once with the microphone off and I meant it, and saying it twice would just be me asking you to make me feel better, and you've given enough away tonight." She had thought about this. You could hear that she had. "But I run a thing, a foundation, a small one, it's mine, it's quiet, almost nobody knows about it. We pay for things hospitals can't, equipment mostly. The boring, expensive machines that save children and don't photograph well." She drew a breath. "I'd like to fund the Theo Vaughn Ward's machines, all of them, quietly, no name on anything. I'd like to be for once the coat in the corner that nobody looks at, that just stands there so somebody else feels guarded." Her voice was very steady now. "You taught me that was worth being, tonight, so that's what I came to say." Cray looked at her for a long moment. And then he did the most extraordinary thing of the entire night, more extraordinary than stepping off the dais, more extraordinary than the story. He broke his post a second time, and he did it for her. He came to attention, this guardsman who had been mocked in front of 800 people by this exact woman not 2 hours before, and he gave her a salute, a proper one. The kind a soldier gives to something he has decided is worth saluting. "Ma'am," he said. She put her hand over her mouth again and nodded, unable to speak, and walked away in her stocking feet across the marble with her shoes in her hand. Her foundation did, in fact, fund every machine in that ward quietly, no name on anything, exactly as she'd promised, and as far as I know not one person outside that room ever learned she'd done it. We came off duty at midnight as I'd thought we would, though nothing else about the night was as I'd thought it would be. In the changing room, hanging up the bearskins, Cray was quiet, which was nothing new. He was always quiet, but it was a different quiet now, the quiet of a man with somewhere to be. I worked up the nerve to ask him the only question that mattered. "Are you going to the hospital?" "Tonight," he said. "Now." "Can I?" I stopped. It was not my place. He had given the whole world his story, and I did not have the right to ask to be at the end of it. Never mind. He looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years, Sergeant Eldon Cray told me something about himself without being asked. "You can come as far as the door," he said. "I'd be glad of a man at the door. I haven't been this afraid of anything since the road." So I went with him in his old car across the sleeping city, and we came to the hospital, the long, low, kind place the gala had spent the night keeping open, and we walked the quiet corridors to the children's wing, and a night nurse who had been told to expect a guardsman pointed us down a hall, and at the end of it, under the soft, low light of a ward where sick children slept, a young doctor in scrubs looked up from a chart. I knew her before she moved. She had the brother's eyes. She must have, because Cray made a sound I had never heard him make, a small caught breath, the sound of 18 years arriving all at once. Dr. Sierra Vall set down her chart. She did not run to him. She was a grown woman now and a doctor, and there were sleeping children 20 feet away, but she crossed that hall quickly, and she stopped in front of the soldier from the bridge, and she looked up at him the way, I imagine, she had looked up at him once before, at the foot of everything, when she was 4 years old on her brother's back. "You told me to wait," she said. "I did," Cray said. His voice was not steady now. It had taken 18 years and a whole life and a roast in a ballroom, but the man with no story had finally come to the end of his composure, and I watched it go, and I was not ashamed to see it. "I'm sorry it took so long to come back for you." "You came back," she said. "That's the only part that ever mattered. Theo always said you would." And then the grown woman did what the 4-year-old could not, all those years ago at the foot of the bridge, and put her arms around the soldier's neck and held on. And the stillest man I have ever known stood in the soft light of a children's ward and let himself be held by someone he had saved before she was old enough to remember it. And over her shoulder, his eyes finally spilled, and he let them, because there was no crowd here to keep his face for, only the children sleeping safe in their beds and a young doctor who had spent her whole life learning how to wait. I stayed at the door like he'd asked. I think about the comedian's line all the time now. A man with no story, nothing behind the stare. She was so sure of it, and so was the whole bright room, and so, in a way, was I, 2 years beside him, and I'd believed it too, that the stillness was the whole of him. But that is the thing the roast got exactly backward. The stillest men are not the empty ones. They are the ones carrying something so heavy that any motion would spill it. Cray held still for 18 years the way you hold a full glass across a crowded room, carefully, both hands, eyes forward, and a ballroom full of clever people looked at that care and called it nothing. The man with no story had the only one that mattered. He'd just been waiting all that time, the way he'd told a 4-year-old to wait, until it was finally safe to set it down. I have stood a great many posts since that night beside a great many men, and I have learned to stop guessing at what's behind the stair. Somewhere behind every one of them, I have come to believe, is a road and an old woman and a question a child once asked that the man never stopped trying to answer. Whose job is it, if it's not yours? Cray is still on the line. He'll tell you he's a coat in the corner. He's wrong about that, and now you know it too. And the ward is open, 40 beds, 40 children at a time, and the name above the door is the name of a boy who decided, when he was 11 years old and half-starved with his sister on his back, that a stranger was his job. The doctor sees that name every morning when she comes on shift. The soldier sees it too on his days off, when he comes and sits in the chair by the nurse's station that still, all these years later, has his name on it. The man with no story. I stood beside him for 2 years and never knew. I am glad, every day, that a cruel woman with a microphone was wrong enough and brave enough afterward to make him tell it. Some stories only the stillest men are strong enough to carry, and some of them, if you wait long enough, get set down at last in the soft light of a place full of sleeping children, exactly where they always belong.